The courthouse smelled of old wood polish and stale coffee, the kind that lingers from 100 tired mornings. Federal Court, Portland, Oregon. My boots echoed against marble as I walked the long aisle toward the witness stand. Every step felt like a rifle shot in a cathedral. I wore full-dress blues, the Navy Cross gleaming under the fluorescent lights. To most people, that medal meant valor. To my family, it meant betrayal. My mother was the first to break the silence. She shot up from the plaintiff's table, pearls clutched tight around her neck like a choke chain. "We don't raise liars in this family," she shouted, her voice cracking through the courtroom like glass shattering on tile. The room froze. Even the bailiff blinked, stunned. I didn't flinch. Years of psychological operations had taught me the power of silence. I stood straighter, chin high, the metal glinting like a target. Across the aisle, my brother Caleb leaned forward, lips curled in a sneer. He had the smooth confidence of a man who never fought for anything harder than a handshake deal. "She spread lies for the military," he told the judge, "and now she's destroyed our family station. Clee FM is finished because of her voice." The words "her voice" hung in the air like a verdict. Clee FM, our family's radio station, once a small-town staple for weather updates and high school football scores. Now it was facing FCC shutdown after multiple lawsuits for spreading fake news. Caleb and my mother blamed me. They said I infected the place with dishonor, with deceit. The irony was suffocating. I had spent 12 years intercepting enemy propaganda, dismantling disinformation campaigns, saving lives with nothing but words. And here I was, accused of being the reason a radio station collapsed. The opposing attorney, a slick man in an Armani suit, strutted forward like he owned the floor. He clicked a remote and the courtroom monitor flickered alive. A grainy video clip played. It showed me, headset on, speaking rapidly in a dimly lit command post in Baghdad. My voice echoed through the speakers, sharp, commanding, relentless. A crowd outside the wire surged as if my words had conjured them. The clip ended in chaos, smoke, shouting, sirens. The attorney turned to the judge, voice dripping with contempt. Blood on her hands shouldn't inherit a broadcast license. Her voice has always been a weapon, not a gift. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Propaganda. Dangerous. Unstable. My lungs felt tight, but I didn't speak. I remembered something Grandpa Joe once told me at age 10 back when I sat cross-legged in the station booth, headphones too big for my head. "One day your voice will cut through the noise." He believed that. No one else did. Now, in this courtroom, the weight of that belief pressed against the lies circling me like vultures. I scanned the room. My mother's cold smile. Caleb's smug eyes. A sea of strangers leaning forward for spectacle. I thought of the men I'd saved overseas, Marines pulling civilians out of ambush sites because I convinced insurgents to retreat with a false broadcast. I thought of the sleepless nights piecing together signal intercepts to protect elections back home. None of that mattered here. Here, I was just the chatterbox daughter, too loud, too reckless, too untrustworthy. The judge cleared his throat. His silver glasses reflected the glow of the monitor. "Major Lee," he said carefully, "you stand accused by your own family of professional misconduct leading to the downfall of Clee FM. Do you wish to respond?" My mouth went dry. Words had always been my armor, but now, standing in that room, every word felt like it could betray me further. I simply laid my hand flat on the table. The Navy Cross clinked softly against the wood. Silence, again, as rebellion. The attorney smirked. "See, no defense, even she knows her voice is guilty." Inside, anger burned low and steady, not a wildfire, more like a fuse. I wanted to tell them everything, about the phantom signals I intercepted as a teenager, about the foreign network that had always been circling us, about the real reason Clee FM collapsed. But timing was its own weapon. I would not waste my words on their mockery. Not yet. I glanced at the gallery. Somewhere in the back, a reporter scribbled furiously. Cameras weren't allowed, but pens could still carve stories, and I knew this story wasn't over. The gavel tapped lightly. "We will reconvene tomorrow," the judge announced. As the room emptied, my mother brushed past me without a glance. Caleb muttered, "Voice of lies," as he walked out. The nickname Voice, the code name given to me by the Navy, twisted now, poisoned in his mouth. I gathered my uniform jacket tighter around my shoulders and walked into the drizzle outside. Portland rain fell cold, steady and merciless, plastering my hair against my forehead. The courthouse steps blurred under the downpour, but I didn't mind. Rain had a way of reminding me of other storms I'd survived. I stood there, metal heavy on my chest, whispers still echoing in my ears. Chatterbox, liar, propaganda puppet. All the names they gave me, all the names I carried. But beneath the noise, Grandpa Joe's words whispered back. "One day your voice will cut through the noise." And suddenly I was 8 again, sitting in the station booth, twisting dials, trying to catch signals no one else believed were real. Signals that would one day chart the path of my life. The courtroom doors shut behind me. Tomorrow, the battle would resume. But tonight, my mind drifted backward, to the first time I discovered a signal no one wanted me to hear. When I was 8 years old, I found my first signal. Not a radio station or a song on the FM dial, but a strange burst of static hidden between frequencies. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor of Clee FM's old broadcast booth, my feet not even touching the ground, spinning the dials on a console older than I was. And there it was, 3 sharp pulses, a pause, 3 more. I didn't know the word then, but later I'd learn it was a dead drop. The message. Excited, I burst into the kitchen where my parents were eating dinner in silence, as always. "Listen, I think I found someone sending code on our station equipment." My father, Frank Lee, barely looked up from his meatloaf. "Samantha, stop making up stories. Radio is music and weather, nothing more." My mother pressed her lips tight. "This is what happens when you let her play with the microphones. She talks too much." The label stuck like a scar. The girl who talked too much. At school, teachers laughed when I raised my hand too often. At church, kids mimicked me, pretending to chatter nonstop. Even at home, the silence was louder than words. My sister Emily would get a smile for practicing piano. Caleb, my golden boy brother, earned applause for touchdowns. Me, I got sighs. I kept asking myself why my parents feared a daughter who wouldn't shut up. I ran back to the booth that night, headphones too big for my head, determined to prove them wrong. I scribbled the pattern in a notebook. My pulse raced like I'd discovered treasure. Grandpa Joe found me there past 10 p.m., the station lights dim, the air smelling of warm dust and solder. He chuckled. "Little chatterbox, still chasing ghosts." I showed him the notebook. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Then he whispered, "One day your voice will cut through the noise." Grandpa saw something no one else dared admit, early signs of genius. He didn't laugh at me. He didn't dismiss me. He tapped the headphones, his weathered hands steady from years in World War II. "Don't stop listening, Sammy. Most folks only hear the loud parts, but soldiers know the truth hides in the static." That night, for the first time, I felt my words weren't a curse. They could be a weapon. The next morning, Caleb found my notebook and read the scribbles at breakfast. "Sam thinks she's a spy," he said, waving the pages. My parents laughed with him, laughed at me. The humiliation burned hotter than the oatmeal in my throat. I learned early that silence was survival, at least at home. But silence never fit me. I kept tuning the dial in secret, filling notebooks with strange bursts and coded taps. It wasn't paranoia, though my family swore it was. It was a gift. And like most gifts, it came with a cost. The more I leaned into that hidden world of signals and voices, the further I drifted from the people I was supposed to belong to. There were nights I sat awake long after everyone went to bed, the glow of the station console painting shadows across the walls. I would whisper into the microphone, pretending someone out there was listening. Sometimes I imagined a soldier in a desert, hearing me through the static. Other times it was just a lonely stranger reaching back through the dark. No one ever answered, but I still believed one day they would. Even then, I felt the split. My family's world was quiet dinners, tidy lawns, predictable schedules. Mine was sparks of noise and mystery, hidden codes, the rush of discovery. They wanted me silent. I wanted the world to speak. Sometimes I wonder if that was the beginning of everything, the rift, the mistrust, the seed of blame that would grow into the courtroom years later. Back then, I just wanted them to hear me, to believe me. Instead, I became the chatterbox, the liar, the girl who embarrassed the family name. But in the quiet corners of Clee FM, with headphones buzzing and Grandpa Joe nodding like he knew something the rest of them refused to see, I felt a spark. A dangerous spark. The kind that could either light a beacon or start a fire. And by the time I was 16, that spark would explode. Because one night, chasing those signals, I discovered something that would turn the whole town against me. By the time I was 16, my obsession had become a secret ritual. After finishing homework, I'd slip into the station booth around 11 p.m. when the town was asleep and my parents trusted me to lock up. The booth smelled of dust and old wiring, the glow of the console like a cockpit waiting for launch. That night, the signal came again, clearer, sharper, undeniable. 3 bursts. A pause, 3 more, then a longer stream, like someone pounding a drum in code. I grabbed my notebook, scribbling frantically. My hands shook, not from fear, but from certainty. This wasn't random static. It was encrypted communication. Someone out there was using our family station as a cover. At 2:10 a.m., I ran into the living room, notebook in hand, adrenaline surging. Caleb was still awake, watching highlights on TV. "Look, I caught it again," I said, waving the pages. "It's a pattern. Somebody's transmitting. This could be espionage." He rolled his eyes. "You've really lost it, Sam." When my father came down in his robe, I tried to explain. "We need to call someone, FBI, anybody. I can prove this." He snatched the notebook, flipped through the scribbles, and slammed it shut. "Enough. You're embarrassing us. Do you know what people already say about this family? Stop inventing conspiracies." The next morning, the humiliation spread. Caleb had already told his friends. By lunchtime, kids at school were calling me Spy Girl. Someone taped a fake FBI badge to my locker with Agent Crazy scrawled across it. Teachers smirked when I raised my hand, whispering I was obsessed with radio ghosts. That weekend, my parents shut down my booth access. "No more late nights," my mother ordered. "You're done embarrassing this family." She gave Caleb the keys to the equipment room instead. The golden boy inherited the console. I inherited silence. But silence didn't stop me. I snuck back in whenever I could, listening, writing, trying to piece together the fragments. The more they called me delusional, the harder I listened. The more they mocked me, the sharper my focus grew. Grandpa Joe tried to shield me. He'd pat my shoulder and say, "Don't let them steal your ears, Sammy. Some soldiers fight with rifles. You fight with frequencies." But even he couldn't stop the tide of ridicule. The breaking point came at a community town hall. My father stood proudly beside Caleb, who had just been named captain of the high school football team. The mayor congratulated him, shaking hands under the bright gym lights. Then, out of nowhere, a classmate shouted, "Ask Sam about her spy codes." Laughter erupted, bouncing off the bleachers like gunfire. My cheeks burned, and my parents didn't defend me. My mother looked away, my father forced a laugh. Caleb smirked. That night I locked myself in the booth one last time. Headphones on, pen poised, I listened. The signal returned, relentless, unignorable. I traced it down to a frequency band I'd never explored before. For a fleeting second, I swore I heard English words buried in the static. Drop confirmed. I leaned back, heart pounding. Someone out there was real. I wasn't crazy. But no one in that town would ever believe me. From that moment, I knew I had to leave. If my family and community wouldn't listen, I'd find someone who would. Someone who understood that words and signals were weapons, just like bullets and bombs. The ridicule didn't crush me, it refined me, like steel in fire. Years later, when I stepped into a Navy recruiter's office, I already knew where I belonged. They didn't laugh when I described the patterns I'd traced or the static that carried hidden truths. They leaned forward, eyes sharp, and said, "We need people who can hear what others can't." That was the moment my exile became my purpose. The chatterbox became a soldier. And soon, the code name, Voice, would be born. At 17, the ridicule finally pushed me out of Oregon. The town had made up its mind. I was the paranoid chatterbox chasing imaginary ghosts. My parents stopped speaking to me except in clipped commands. Caleb thrived, golden boy under Friday night lights. Me, I packed my notebooks full of scribbled signals and walked into a Navy recruiter's office at 3 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday. The recruiter barely looked at my transcript. Instead, he leaned over the table as I showed him years of frequency logs. "You've been hearing this since you were a kid?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "Most people can't even explain the difference between AM and FM. You think in bandwidths we need that. What my family had called madness, the Navy treated as a gift. Boot camp was a shock. Silence was no longer survival, volume was. Orders barked at 5 a.m., boots pounding gravel at 6:15 a.m. I learned to shut my mouth when told, but I never turned off my ears. In the classroom, pattern recognition tests flashed on the wall, random dots and lines, static waves. Others groaned. I smiled. I could see shapes hiding inside the noise, like ghosts revealing themselves. Within a month, instructors stopped calling me Samantha and started calling me that girl who hears everything. The label stuck, but this time it felt like armor. After training, I was assigned to Naval Intelligence, the youngest female in my unit. My first day, I walked into a comms bunker in Bahrain. Screens lined the walls, a dozen languages scrolling at once. The air buzzed with chatter, intercepted phone calls, pirate radio, encrypted bursts. An older chief slid a headset toward me. "See if you can find something in this mess." I slipped it on. Within minutes, my pen scribbled across the page. 3 bursts, a pause, 3 more, my chest tightened. It was the same rhythm I'd heard back in Oregon, sitting in that dusty booth. I pushed the notepad across the desk. The chief's eyes widened. "How the hell did you catch that so fast?" "Because I've been hearing it my whole life," I said quietly. The childhood signals weren't ghosts. They were the enemy's code. The room shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the kid everyone mocked. I was the one soldier who could hear what no one else could. They sent me deeper into psy-ops, psychological operations. My job wasn't just intercepting signals, but shaping them. Crafting broadcasts that would change behavior, bend morale, make enemies doubt themselves. Words as weapons. It came naturally. Too naturally. My voice carried across speakers, through radios, even pirated TV stations. Sometimes I could almost feel the enemy flinch when I spoke. That was when my code name was born. One late night during an operation, I was guiding a Marine unit through hostile streets in Basra. The comms went down. Panic flared in the squad's voices. I grabbed a backup handset, spoke steady and sharp, threading calm into chaos. Minutes later, they made it out. When they returned, one Lance Corporal clapped me on the shoulder. "Whoever that was on the net, your voice saved us." From then on, in every log and every op, I wasn't Samantha Lee anymore. I was voice. But glory had a cost. Late nights bled into dawns. My throat burned raw from hours of transmissions. Sleep was a stranger. Still, every time I touched the mic, I remembered Grandpa Joe's whisper, "One day your voice will cut through the noise." He'd been right, it had. Yet even with success, letters home brought no answer. I wrote about training, about the desert heat, about how I finally felt useful. Silence returned in place of reply. My family wasn't proud. My father told neighbors I was doing desk work for the government. My mother said I ran away chasing fantasies. To them, I was still the chatterbox who never learned to shut up. But to the Navy, I was a weapon. And soon, the world would know what a voice could do. Because the next mission wasn't just about decoding signals. It was about dismantling a storm, a disinformation war that would decide the fate of nations. By the time I turned 22, I was no longer just another junior officer scribbling intercepts in a notebook. I was voice, the soldier whose words traveled farther than any rifle round. And the world was sliding into a new kind of conflict. In the fall of 2012, the mission brief arrived at 7:30 a.m. inside a windowless bunker outside Arlington. Intelligence analysts laid out the truth. 5 nations, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Syria, had joined forces in a coordinated disinformation campaign. Their goal was simple and devastating: undermine faith in U.S. elections, fracture communities, make citizens doubt the ballot box itself. Screens glowed with false headlines and doctored videos. Staged riots, fake polling station fires, thousands of sock puppet accounts whispering lies into the digital bloodstream. The enemy wasn't firing artillery. They were firing stories. I knew immediately that this was my battlefield. The hours bled together. At 2 a.m., I'd be tracing a coded transmission from Tehran. At 4:15 a.m., hijacking a satellite stream pushing doctored footage of burning ballots. By 6 a.m., we were already scripting counter-broadcasts to flood the airwaves before ordinary Americans poured their morning coffee. Days and nights flipped. My life became an endless cycle of noise. Most people couldn't survive it. Some quit, some cracked, I stayed. Every night at 11 p.m., when the rest of the world drifted into sleep, I felt my focus sharpen. I could hear rhythms in the chaos, the fingerprints of liars. The lies sounded different to me, almost like a discordant instrument out of tune. And once I found the pitch, I could play it back against them. We launched a counter-campaign we called Phantom Echo. My voice, calm, deliberate, cutting, slipped into their channels in Russian, Arabic, and Farsi. I gave false orders to their operatives, redirected their trolls against one another, and spread cracks through their networks. Entire troll farms collapsed as my words turned them inward, snarling at shadows. At its height, Phantom Echo ran 20 hours a day. I rotated between 3 different voices, sometimes whispering orders as if from an enemy commander, sometimes posing as a civilian desperate for truth, sometimes booming across pirated television feeds with instructions designed to sow chaos. I never saw the faces of those I manipulated, but I felt their hesitation, their fear. The hesitation was enough to save real lives. It struck me every time I held the mic. The same chatter my family mocked as useless was now the weapon that outmaneuvered armies. But the cost was high. My throat burned raw after hours of transmissions. Coffee replaced sleep. Even when I wasn't on comms, I found myself murmuring into empty air, phrases I had repeated until they branded my brain. Some nights I startled awake at 3:10 a.m., drenched in sweat, certain I still heard mobs chanting through the static. The weight of it pressed into my chest. Psy-ops wasn't just strategy. It was stepping into another mind and pulling strings. Every time I succeeded, I felt pride. But every time I heard an enemy's voice crack under the pressure, a piece of me wondered what line I had crossed. Still, the operation was working. By the summer of 2014, the five-nation alliance had collapsed into chaos. Their false headlines were exposed as frauds, their bots tearing each other apart. And in foreign capitals, angry citizens demanded answers from their own governments. That's when I was summoned to the Pentagon. The ceremony took place at 10 a.m. in the Hall of Heroes. I stood at attention as the citation was read. For extraordinary heroism in the face of an international threat, Lieutenant Samantha Lee is awarded the Navy Cross. The medal was cool metal against my chest, heavier than I imagined. Photographers' flashes lit the room. My teammates whispered, "Wizard." Yet in that moment of honor, my thoughts were thousands of miles away in Portland. My mother's voice still rang louder than the applause. "We don't raise liars in this family." My brother's smirk haunted me more than the enemy ever had. The military saw valor. My family still saw disgrace. That night, back in my quarters, I placed the Navy Cross on the desk under the lamplight. It gleamed, beautiful and hollow. What good was a medal if the people who raised me refused to see it? At 2:40 a.m., the phone buzzed with a new assignment. Another campaign, another battle waiting. There was no time to breathe, no time to feel, only the next mission. I switched off the lamp and lay in the dark, eyes open, listening to whispers only I could hear. The sound of mobs, the hiss of propaganda, my mother's contempt tangled inside the static. I had saved democracy, but who was there to save me? When the news of my Navy Cross finally reached Oregon, the silence from home was deafening. No calls, no letters, no "we're proud of you," only rejection, colder than any battlefield night. The next chapter of my life wouldn't be fought overseas. It would drag me back to the one place I had tried to leave behind, the family that had never believed in me. The morning after the Navy Cross ceremony, I woke at 5:20 a.m. in a hotel room in Washington, D.C. The medal sat heavy on the nightstand, catching a sliver of sunrise through the curtains. My throat was raw from handshakes, speeches, photographs. The Navy called me a savior, but all I could think about was the silence from home. I dialed the number I had memorized since childhood. The phone rang 3 times before my mother answered. "Hello." Her voice was clipped, like she'd already made up her mind. "It's me, Mom," I said carefully. "It's Sam, did you see the news?" A pause, then ice. "We don't celebrate liars in this family." The words cut deeper than any battlefield wound. I tried to steady my breath. "It wasn't lies. I stopped something that could have." She cut me off. "You spread propaganda for a paycheck. You brainwash people. Don't ever call here again." The line went dead. By 5:50 a.m., I was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the blank screen. I thought of the men I had saved, the operations where my voice turned chaos into survival. None of that mattered to her. To them, I was still the chatterbox who never shut up. That night I tried again, this time calling Caleb. He picked up after 2 rings. "Well, if it isn't the government's favorite ventriloquist," he sneered. "What's next? Teaching Americans how to salute their televisions." "Caleb, listen." "No, you listen. You've poisoned our family name. Clee FM is hanging by a thread because people think we're liars, and you made lying into a career. Congratulations." The line went silent before I could answer. I sat in the dark until nearly 2 a.m., replaying the conversations in my head. Every insult stung, but the silence afterward hurt more. The only call that came was from Grandpa Joe. His voice was thin, frail with age, but steady. "Voice," he said softly, "don't let them break you. The truth always cuts through, even if it takes years. I'm proud of you." I swallowed hard. "Thank you, Grandpa. They don't see you," he said. "But I do, and someday the world will too." When the line went quiet, I sat alone in that hotel room, the city buzzing faintly outside. I stared at the Navy Cross again. To the military, it was a symbol of valor. To my family, it was just another piece of evidence that I was dangerous. In the days that followed, The rejection grew louder than applause. Strangers congratulated me at airports. Senators shook my hand. But every letter I sent home was returned unopened, every voicemail unanswered. The hometown newspaper ran a column calling me a propaganda puppet in uniform. I kept the clippings. I told myself they didn't matter, but at night alone, I unfolded them and read each word like shrapnel. Sometimes I would place the Navy cross beside them, as if weighing honor against hatred. Some nights the metal felt heavier than the paper. Other nights, the words crushed me more than the metal ever could. At 11:30 p.m. one evening, unable to sleep, I walked through Arlington Cemetery. The air was cool, the rows of white stones glowing in moonlight. I found Grandpa Joe's empty plot reserved beside Grandma. I stood there and whispered, "They think I'm nothing but a liar, but you know the truth." The cemetery was silent, but in that silence I found something steadier than applause or rejection, a reminder that I wasn't fighting for headlines or for my family's pride. I was fighting because the lies never stopped and someone had to answer them. Still, the weight of their words pressed harder each day. Metals couldn't erase the ache of being disowned. I lay awake many nights until 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of voices calling me a liar, a fraud, a curse. It was a different kind of battlefield, when I fought in silence, armed only with stubborn breath and clenched fists in the dark. By the spring of 2015, I had convinced myself that maybe I could bury the pain in work. If my family wanted me to be a stranger, I would be the best stranger they never knew. But the truth has a way of dragging you back. And when the lawsuits against CLE-FM began piling higher, my family's silence would finally crack. The daughter they rejected would be the one they needed most. By the summer of 2016, I had turned rejection into fuel. The calls home had ended in slammed doors and severed ties, but the war against lies never stopped. If the Navy wanted me to dismantle propaganda overseas, then I would build something to fight it at home. I started small, just me, a laptop, and a rented office above a coffee shop in D.C. At 9 a.m. every morning, I opened the blinds and stared at the Capitol dome, reminding myself why I was there. By noon, I was fielding tip lines, tracing digital fingerprints of doctored headlines, mapping troll farms like battle plans. The work felt like combat, except the battlefield was glowing screens instead of sand and smoke. The first year nearly broke me. Some days I slept on the office floor, my head resting on a stack of reports. At 2 a.m., I'd still be chasing false domains registered overseas, my eyes burning. I pawned my car to pay 2 part-time researchers. But slowly, the trickle of stories grew into impact. A local paper picked up one of our investigations into a false charity scam. Then a senator cited our report on foreign bot networks. By 2018, the seed had grown into an empire. My fact-checking initiative expanded into a network of journalists and analysts, then into a full-fledged media company with bureaus on 3 continents. We called it Signal One. Our motto was simple: truth is the only frequency. The newsroom pulsed like a living organism. Dozens of screens glowed with real-time data. Analysts shouted across cubicles. Reporters rushed out with recorders and cameras. At 7 p.m., the glass conference room lit up with editorial debates about which story carried the most danger if left unchecked. I watched it all and felt the hum of command. I was 30 years old and the youngest female CEO of a media company in the country. The recognition followed. One evening at 8 p.m., I stood on a stage at a journalism summit in New York. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed. A banner behind me read, "Signal One, fighting for truth in an age of lies." I smiled for the crowd, but inside I felt the same hollow ache. The louder the applause, the more deafening the silence from Oregon became. while my network rose. Clee FM back in Oregon was collapsing. The lawsuits had drained the station. Advertisers vanished. Rumors spread that the FCC would revoke its license within the year. The headlines reached me one morning at 6:45 a.m. while I was scanning the day's feeds. A trade paper reported, "Local station faces closure amid fake news scandal." The photograph was unmistakable. The faded Clee FM logo on the building where I once sat cross-legged, headphones too big for my head. I stared at it for a long time, torn between fury and pity. I remembered the smell of dust in that booth, the nights I whispered into the mic pretending someone was listening. That place had been my exile and my refuge, and now it was burning down under the weight of its own lies. The irony was sharper than any insult Caleb had ever thrown. The daughter branded a liar had built a truth-telling empire. The family that mocked her obsession with signals had drowned in the noise of their own deceit. The calls from Oregon began soon after, first from distant cousins, asking if I had heard. Then from my sister Emily, voice trembling, saying, "Mom and Dad don't know what to do. They might lose everything." I listened in silence, heart hardening. That night, walking through the Signal One newsroom at 11 p.m., I paused by the glass wall overlooking the city. Reporters tapped at keyboards, chasing the next story. Screens glowed with data feeds. This was my war now, my army, my battlefield. And for the first time, I wondered if the family that had disowned me would dare to call. The answer came faster than I expected. It was 8:10 a.m. on a Monday when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother's. My hand hovered over the screen, pulse quickening. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Her voice was strained, breaking. "Sam, we need your help." The silence that followed was heavier than the Navy Cross ever was. I stood at my office window, staring at the city I had conquered, and felt the old weight of Oregon pressing back against me. It was 8:10 a.m. on a Monday when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in years. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. My mother's voice had haunted me across continents, echoing accusations louder than mortar fire. For a moment, I considered letting it ring into silence, but the weight of it was heavier than any metal I had ever worn. I pressed accept. "Sam," her voice was thin, cracking. "We need your help." For a long beat, I didn't speak. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see Signal One humming to life. Analysts pouring coffee at 8:15 a.m., reporters tapping keyboards, screens flashing with stories about foreign bots and doctored headlines. My empire was alive, buzzing with purpose. And now the family that had cast me out was tugging me back into their storm. "What kind of help?" I asked finally. Her breath shook. "It's the station, the lawsuits, the FCC. They're going to shut us down. We'll lose everything." The words should have felt like vindication. Instead, they hollowed me out. I flew back to Oregon that Friday, landing at Portland International Airport at 6:05 p.m. The rain was waiting for me, as relentless as the years I had tried to leave behind. By 7:30 p.m., I was driving past the old roads, past the high school football field where Caleb's name was still painted on a rusting scoreboard. The world had moved on, but here the ghosts were alive and waiting. When I pulled up to Clee FM, my chest tightened. The building sagged under the weight of neglect. Paint peeled from the siding, the logo faded almost to nothing. A foreclosure notice flapped against the front door, beaten by wind and rain. Inside, the air smelled like mildew and dust. I remembered the scent of solder and static from my childhood, the glow of the console that once felt like magic. Now it was just ruin. My father sat slumped in a folding chair, eyes ringed with exhaustion. My mother stood stiffly beside him, pearls still at her throat like armor. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smirk barely hiding his bitterness. "You came," my mother said, voice flat, not gratitude, just fact. "I came to see the damage," I answered. The meeting stretched late into the night. At 9:15 p.m., lawyers spread documents across the scarred wooden table. The FCC hearings were scheduled within weeks. Multiple defamation suits loomed, each claiming Clee FM had broadcast fake stories seeded by anonymous sources. Caleb jabbed a finger at me. "This is your fault. You made people believe we were liars. Your career poisoned this station." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "No, Caleb, you did that yourselves. You aired stories without checking, took money without asking where it came from. You didn't need me to ruin you. You did that all on your own." His jaw tightened. My mother looked away. My father said nothing. The lawyers cleared their throats. "Major Lee, you have expertise in communications warfare. The station's survival may depend on proving these stories were not intentional fabrications, but sabotage. Do you have the capability to prove that?" The word sabotage lit a fuse inside me. Memories surged. Late nights in Bahrain, the three-pulse signals, the whispers buried in static. I realized the same patterns I'd hunted overseas might have been reborn here, infecting the airwaves of my own family. For the next week, I buried myself in the wreckage. At 10 a.m. each morning, I combed through hard drives stacked in a damp back office. At 3 p.m., I cross-referenced timestamps with known foreign bot activity. At 1:20 a.m., when everyone else was asleep, I scrolled through months of broadcasts, eyes burning as static hissed through the headphones. And then one night at 2:35 a.m., I heard it. 3 bursts, a pause, 3 more. The rhythm I had first discovered at 8 years old. The enemy had never left. They had simply shifted battlegrounds. Clee FM had been hijacked, used as a local mouthpiece for a global network. My family hadn't just been careless, they had been played. When I laid out the evidence, the room fell silent. It was 7:40 p.m., the table littered with printouts and signal maps. "This proves nothing," Caleb snapped. "Maybe you made it up. Maybe this is just another story." My hand slammed against the table. "I've been hearing this pattern my whole life, and you ignored me, you mocked me. But now it's here, written in your own broadcasts. This isn't about me lying, it's about you never listening." My mother's face tightened, but her eyes flickered. Doubt, fear, maybe even the first crack in her certainty. The lawyers whispered among themselves. "If this holds in court, it could shift the entire case. The station wasn't a willing conspirator, it was a victim." Still, the nights gnawed at me. At 12:10 a.m., sitting alone in the booth where I once played at being a spy, I traced the outlines of my childhood scribbles. I had wanted them to listen so badly. Now, years later, they were forced to. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like being dragged back into chains I thought I'd broken. One evening, as I walked out of the station at 11:55 p.m., the rain pouring harder than ever, Emily caught my arm. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "You don't owe them anything." I stared into the storm. "No, but I owe the truth something." When the FCC hearing date was set, the family looked to me as if I had become their last hope. The irony was bitter enough to taste. The liar, the chatterbox, the voice they rejected, now standing between them and total collapse. And deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Because the next battle wouldn't just test my skills as a soldier. It would test whether I could ever forgive the people who had broken me. The night after I confirmed the familiar 3-burst signal, I couldn't sleep. At 1:25 a.m., I sat alone in the Clee FM booth, headphones clamped tight, listening to the hiss of static. Every pulse felt like a ghost tapping against my skull. I'd heard it at 8 years old, at 16, in Bahrain, in Baghdad, and now, here, woven through the broadcasts of the family station that had once mocked me into silence. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about saving Clee FM. It was about proving once and for all that I had been right all along. At 9:15 a.m., I walked into the crumbling station office where the lawyers had set up shop. Papers were spread across the desk like battlefield maps. "I need access to every raw feed you've got from the last 5 years," I said. One of them hesitated. "That's thousands of hours of audio." "Then it'll take thousands of hours," I replied. "I've done more with less." The next weeks blurred into a rhythm of obsession. At 10 a.m., I sifted through terabytes of stored files, ears ringing with phantom noise. By 2:30 p.m., I was charting bursts on giant corkboards, red thread running like arteries across the room. At 11:20 p.m., when exhaustion set in, I forced myself to keep going, coffee, static, ink-stained fingers. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The signals weren't random. They were layered instructions, piggybacked on legitimate broadcasts. Local weather reports carried time stamps that matched known disinformation pushes overseas. A late-night talk show clip about city politics had been seeded with coded triggers. The realization chilled me. My family's station had become a Trojan horse. Not just sloppy journalism, but a weaponized relay. When I presented the findings to my family at 8 p.m. one evening, the reaction was explosive. "You're lying," Caleb snapped, slamming his fist against the table. "You've hated this station your whole life. Now you're making up ghost stories to bury it." I shoved the printouts across the table. "Look at the frequencies, look at the time stamps. This isn't my fantasy, it's sabotage." My father rubbed his temples, silent as ever. My mother's pearls trembled against her collarbone. Emily whispered, "If this is true, then we've been victims all along." "Victims?" Caleb barked. "She's the reason anyone thinks we're liars in the first place." I leaned forward, voice steady, colder than steel. "You want someone to blame. Blame the enemies who hijacked your microphone. Or blame yourselves for never listening when I tried to warn you." The deeper I dug, the darker it got. At 4:05 a.m. one morning, cross-referencing intercepted chatter with CLI-FM archives, I discovered entire segments lifted word for word from foreign propaganda outlets. Scripts had been emailed under false names, disguised as listener contributions. Caleb had approved them without question. That was the hardest truth. It wasn't just sabotage, it was negligence, and negligence was almost as damning. By noon that day, I confronted him in the station hall. "You read those emails, you aired them." He sneered. "So what? They paid, we needed the money." I stared at him, fury boiling in my chest. "You sold out our name, you sold out Grandpa's legacy, and now you expect me to clean up the mess." His smirk faltered for the first time. For once, Caleb didn't have a comeback. The silence that fell between us was heavier than all the static I'd ever heard. Still, I couldn't stop. Each day I uncovered more. Forged sponsorship contracts, anonymous wire transfers routed through shell companies, all timed with the bursts of coded messages. At 6:45 p.m. one evening, hunched over the console, I realized the sabotage had been deliberate, foreign adversaries using Caleb's greed as their gateway. The discovery tightened like a noose around my chest. If I could prove it in court, I might save the station's license. But the cost was clear. Exposing Caleb's complicity would destroy him, and maybe that was justice. Emily found me there at 9 p.m., papers scattered around me. "You're killing yourself," she said softly. "They never believed you. Why risk everything now?" I took off the headphones and rubbed my burning eyes. Because the truth doesn't care who believes it. It just waits. And when it's ready, it cuts through everything. She looked at me as if she wanted to argue, but instead she nodded. "Then make them hear it this time." The words echoed long after she left. I returned to the booth, the glow of the console painting my hands in green and red. The signals pulsed again, steady, relentless. Proof that the lies had never stopped. Proof that the world needed to see. And as I mapped the final connections, I realized the investigation was no longer just about my family's survival. It was about dragging an enemy network into the light. The courtroom would not be kind. The judge would demand evidence, the lawyers would attack my credibility, and Caleb might try to twist the knife deeper. But for the first time since I was 8 years old, I had the proof in my hands. The chatterbox they called a liar would speak, and the world would have to listen. The federal courthouse in Portland was crowded by 8:45 a.m. Reporters lined the steps, microphones raised like bayonets, their questions sharp and endless. I walked past them in my dress blues, the Navy cross pinned to my chest like both shield and target. The trial that could decide the fate of CLE-FM was about to begin, and for once I wasn't just a daughter or a soldier. I was both. Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with anticipation. The FCC's attorneys stacked binders on their table, ready to argue that the Lee family station was a willful distributor of fake news. On the other side, my family sat in silence. My mother's pearls, Caleb's folded arms, my father's hollow stare. I took my seat at the witness stand at 9:05 a.m., the evidence I had spent weeks collecting locked in a folder at my side. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Major Lee, you may begin." I took a breath and opened the folder. This station was not a willing participant in disinformation. It was infiltrated. The first exhibit lit up on the courtroom monitor, the familiar 3-burst pattern. I explained how it had threaded through broadcasts, hidden beneath weather reports and talk shows. I showed time-stamps aligned with known foreign bot operations. By 9:45 a.m., murmurs rippled through the gallery. Even the judge leaned forward. At 10:20 a.m., the FCC's lead attorney rose. "Major Lee, what you are describing sounds more like a spy novel than a broadcast operation. Are you suggesting your family was completely unaware?" I looked at Caleb, then back at the attorney. Unaware or unwilling to see what was in front of them, negligence opened the door. Sabotage walked through it. Gasps fluttered across the room. My mother's hand shook as she clutched her pearls. My father stared down at the table. Then the real blow landed. At 11:10 a.m., I submitted financial records traced through shell companies. Wire transfers from accounts linked to known foreign operatives had flowed straight into CLE-FM's coffers. The attorney pounced. "So your family profited?" "Yes," I said firmly. "But not knowingly. They were played. They were pawns in a larger campaign designed to destabilize America. And I have proof." I gestured to the back of the courtroom. The doors opened, and Admiral Ruiz walked in, his uniform immaculate, ribbons stretching across his chest. The gallery erupted in whispers. At 11:25 a.m., he took the stand. "I can confirm that Major Lee led operations dismantling a 5-nation disinformation alliance. The same networks she fought overseas are linked to these broadcasts. Her testimony is consistent with classified findings now cleared for release." The judge's gavel slammed once for silence. The weight of the room shifted. Caleb shifted uneasily in his chair. At 1:15 p.m. under cross-examination, the FCC attorneys revealed emails he had approved, scripts lifted directly from propaganda feeds. His defense cracked. He stammered. "I thought they were just edgy stories. I didn't know." But I had already shown the payments, the signatures. His negligence was undeniable. By 3:05 p.m., the gallery was buzzing with a new narrative. The Lee family wasn't a den of liars. It was a station hijacked by foreign adversaries, with one son complicit through greed, and a daughter who had spent her life trying to prove the truth hidden in static. The judge's voice carried above the noise. "Major Lee, your evidence is compelling. The question now is not whether the station broadcast falsehoods. It clearly did. The question is whether intent can be proven, and from what I've seen, intent lies elsewhere. My mother gasped. Caleb's face drained of color. My father's eyes glistened for the first time in years. At 4:20 p.m., as the judge recessed for the day, reporters surged forward. Flashbulbs lit the room like gunfire. "Major Lee, did you just save your family's station? Is it true foreign governments targeted you personally? Do you think your family owes you an apology?" I said nothing. I let the silence hang, the same silence that had once been my rebellion. When I stepped outside at 4:45 p.m., the rain greeted me again, cold and steady. I tilted my face to the sky, metal glinting under gray clouds. The storm had only begun, but the truth was finally breaking through. And as I walked down those courthouse steps, I knew the verdict would change more than a station's license. It would change the very fabric of what my family believed about me. The battle in court was only half finished. The battle at home was still waiting, and I wasn't sure which one would cut deeper. The courthouse was packed again by 9 a.m. the next morning. Reporters crowded the marble steps, holding cameras high, their voices rising over one another as they tried to predict how the case would end. Inside, the gallery hummed with tension. Families of employees, local journalists, and curious townspeople filled the benches, waiting to hear if CLE-FM would survive or collapse under the weight of its sins. I sat at the witness stand, the Navy cross gleaming on my chest. Across the aisle, my family huddled together. My mother's pearls shone under the overhead lights, but her face was pale. Caleb leaned forward with the same smirk he'd worn since we were children, though sweat dotted his brow. My father's hands trembled as he folded and refolded a handkerchief in his lap. Emily sat apart from them, her shoulders drawn tight, her eyes fixed on me. At 9:20 a.m., the judge entered. The room fell into silence. He cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented, the intercepted signals, the foreign financial transfers, the testimony of Admiral Ruiz. We have also weighed the negligence demonstrated by the station's management. It is now time for judgment." The words hung in the air like thunderclouds ready to break. At 9:40 a.m., the gavel came down. "This court finds that CLE-FM was not a willful participant in disinformation campaigns, but rather a victim of infiltration and sabotage. The station's license shall be preserved. However, the negligence of certain parties cannot be ignored. As such, operational control of CLE-FM is hereby transferred equally to Emily Lee and Major Samantha Lee. Caleb Lee is barred from holding any managerial position." The gallery erupted. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls as if they were slipping from her throat. My father's handkerchief fluttered to the floor. Caleb bolted upright, shouting, "This is a setup. She poisoned you just like she poisoned this family." The bailiff stepped forward, forcing him back into his seat. I sat still, letting the moment sink in. Vindication tasted strange, sharp, bitter, almost metallic. The truth had been exposed. The court had recognized it, but instead of triumph, I felt only a hollow ache. By 11 a.m., the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters. Flashbulbs cracked like rifle fire. "Major Lee, how does it feel to win? Do you think your family will finally accept you? What's next for CLE-FM?" I gave no answers. Silence was still my rebellion. Inside, the family gathered in a corner conference room. My mother's eyes were blazing. "You destroyed us," she hissed, "parading our shame for the world to see." I met her glare. "No, Mother, I exposed the truth. You destroyed yourselves when you ignored it." Caleb lunged forward, fists clenched, but Emily stepped between us. "Enough, this is over." The court spoke. "Sam saved us." "Saved us," my brother barked. "She humiliated us. She's not one of us." I looked at him then, really looked, his face flushed, his bravado cracking, The boy who had once laughed at me for scribbling codes now revealed as the man who had gambled his family's name for profit. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. At 1:30 p.m., the lawyers congratulated me. "Major, your testimony was the turning point. Without you, this station would have died." But when I walked out of the courthouse at 2:05 p.m., the metal still heavy on my chest, I didn't feel like a savior. I felt like someone carrying two legacies, one forged in war, the other poisoned by lies, and I wasn't sure which weighed more. That evening, I found myself back at the station. The sun was setting at 7:50 p.m., casting long shadows across the cracked walls. Emily was already inside, moving boxes, clearing out old files. She looked up at me and smiled faintly. "We get to start over." I nodded, but my eyes drifted to the booth, the place where I had first heard the signals, the place where Caleb had mocked me, the place where my voice had once been just a child's chatter. At 9 p.m., I sat inside again, headphones over my ears. The static hissed, familiar and relentless. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged here, not as a daughter desperate for approval, but as the woman who had dragged the truth out of silence. Still, the victory was not sweet. It was jagged, unfinished. My mother's contempt still burned. My brother's hatred still festered. My father's silence was as heavy as ever. Vindication had come, but reconciliation had not. At 10:45 p.m., as I left the station, Emily walked beside me. "Sam, do you think they'll ever forgive you?" I paused, staring into the rain-slick street. "Some truths don't need forgiveness, they just need to be heard." She nodded, but the weight between us lingered. The next morning, the newspapers declared victory. "Station saved by soldier's testimony. Major Lee exposes foreign plot." My picture was everywhere, metal glinting, uniform crisp. But the headlines didn't tell the whole story. They couldn't capture the way my mother's voice still echoed or the emptiness in my father's eyes. The verdict had given me control, but it hadn't given me peace. And as I stared at the folded newspaper on my desk at 6:30 a.m., I knew the real ending wasn't in court. It would be written at the station itself, in the broadcasts yet to come, because the final chapter wasn't about survival anymore. It was about rebirth. The morning after the verdict, I woke at 6:30 a.m. with a newspaper folded on my desk. The headline screamed triumph. "Station saved by soldier's testimony." The photo beneath showed me in dress blues, Navy cross gleaming. To the world, the story had ended. But as I stared at the ink bleeding into the page, I knew the real ending would not be written in a courtroom. It had to be written on the airwaves themselves. At 9 a.m., I stood inside the booth at CLE FM, a place that once felt like exile. The consoles hummed faintly. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, spilling through the blinds. Emily stood in the corner, boxes stacked at her side, her face carrying the weight of new responsibility. She smiled. "It's yours now too, Sam. What do you want to do with it?" I looked around, memory flooding back. 8 years old, headphones slipping off my ears. 16, scribbling patterns while the world called me crazy. 30, carrying the Navy cross that felt heavier than honor itself. Every chapter of my life had echoed inside these walls. Now, at last, it was my turn to decide the frequency. By noon, I gathered the small staff that had remained through the lawsuits. Tired faces, worn by years of humiliation, looked at me with cautious hope. I cleared my throat. This station won't be about noise anymore. It won't be about fear or manipulation. From today forward, CLE FM will be reborn, and it will carry only one message, truth. There was a silence, heavy but not hostile. Slowly, they nodded. One of the older engineers wiped his eyes. "About damn time," he muttered. At 2:15 p.m., I began clearing the shelves in the booth. Old reels, cracked microphones, yellowed scripts from years when propaganda had poisoned the air. In their place, I set new equipment, monitors linked directly to Signal One's fact-checking database. The past would not be erased, but it would no longer control the future. That evening at 7:30 p.m., Emily and I hung a plaque on the wall above the console, the truth frequency. The words gleamed in brass, catching the studio lights. Beneath it, I placed Grandpa Joe's battered microphone on a stand. It would never transmit again, but it would remain as a promise. His words echoed in my memory. One day, your voice will cut through the noise. At 8 p.m. sharp, I took my seat at the console. My fingers hovered over the switch. The on-AIR light glowed red. For the first time in decades, I was about to speak into the mic not as a child desperate to be heard, not as a soldier broadcasting to foreign battlefields, but as a woman reclaiming her own story. My name is Major Samantha Lee, I began. My voice filled the booth, steady, unshaken. Some of you know me as the chatterbox, some as the voice. To others, maybe just a liar. Tonight, I want you to know me as someone who has walked through lies, carried the weight of silence, and still believes in the power of truth. This station is not dead, it lives. And from this frequency forward, we speak only one language, honesty. Static hissed, then faded as if even the air itself was clearing. The phones lit up almost instantly. A former listener called to say, "We're glad you're back." Another added, "We stopped believing in you, but maybe we can again." Their words weren't forgiveness, not yet, but they were a beginning. By midnight, Emily and I sat in the empty newsroom, exhaustion softening into relief. "You did it," she said quietly. I shook my head. "We did it, and it's only the first broadcast. Tomorrow we prove it again, and the day after that." She leaned against me, silent but warm. For once, silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like peace. The next weeks passed in a blur. At 7 a.m. each morning, I reviewed fact-check reports with Signal One analysts. At 10 a.m., I broadcast headlines scrubbed of spin, stripped down to facts. By 6 p.m., we fielded calls, not for ratings but for dialogue. Slowly, the community returned. Not in droves, not overnight, but one honest broadcast at a time. And somewhere along the way, I realized the courtroom had given me vindication, but the microphone gave me something deeper. Purpose. The chatterbox child, the voice soldier, the woman with the Navy cross, they had all been fragments. Now they were whole, fused into a single frequency. One rainy evening, standing alone in the booth at 9:45 p.m., I touched Grandpa Joe's microphone and whispered, "We did it." This is where the story ends, but also where it truly begins. They called me a liar. They called me a chatterbox. They called me dangerous. And maybe I was all of those things at different times. But when the noise cleared, there was one truth left standing. Words can save. And that is the frequency I choose to leave with you. Friends, thank you for staying with me until the very last part of Samantha, voice, Lee's journey. If her fight for truth, her pain, and her rebirth touched you, I hope you'll carry her story forward. May it remind you that silence can wound, but truth always heals. I wish you peace, strength, and clarity, wherever you are, whatever battles you fight. If you found meaning in this story, please support the channel by subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters too. Let it be heard.